Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a brand new podcast. Today we're going to start something completely brand new and completely exciting. Had a wonderful conversation for about an hour or so with Lauren. Now Lauren is a brand photographer from Newcastle, which is great, connected through Only, so thank you to her for her time, and I'm now going to hand over to her to introduce her a little bit. And this is also going to be the first in some changes I'm going to make to the podcast to videoize it, even though we are obviously doing it remotely. It's something I want to try, something I want to experiment with as well. So let me know feedback in the comments down below. I'll see you very, very soon.
I'm Lauren McWilliams. I'm a brand photographer based in Newcastle upon Tyne. So I help small business owners to capture a bank of images that represents who they are, what they do, how they do that, and basically help them to use those images within their marketing.
Fantastic, and welcome to the podcast. As I was briefly explaining to you before we started the podcast, this is completely new. Everything I've decided to do is throw out the window. I had a plan. I had a podcast that worked, and I've now decided to try something new, which is exciting, and hopefully it won't have a tech issue. But I really appreciate the time, and I think it's a really important time to reflect on what a lot of people are doing. I mean, starting out, how old have you been, or how old is your business, or how long have you kind of been in business? Because I think it's an important gauge point to gather kind of like where people are, if that makes sense. So, and then how have you been finding that, the pandemic and etc. I mean, because a lot of businesses, they have tackled it differently, right? So they've gone about it differently, or they've showcased it differently, or they've found actually these are the problems that we have, though maybe they're not necessarily the same as the problems that someone else may have. So
my business is 3 years old this month. So when I started my business, obviously the first year is kind of establishing yourself and finding out, discovering where you want to be, what you want to do, who do you want to work with. So it was all of those hurdles that I was going over, and then go into the second year, and hello pandemic, as you say. There was no rule book of what to do in a pandemic, or how do you keep your business afloat during a pandemic. So it was a lot of guesswork, but I think because I'd worked so hard in the first year of this is something that I love and I can see a future being in that business, that I didn't want to give it up. And I think the easy thing to do, well, maybe not, it's different for everybody. I'm speaking for my own self. The easy thing for me to do was to go and find a job and just come back to it whenever all of this disappears. But I was so determined that actually I was in a really good position, that my fiance was still working full time, he was working from home, and so he could support us while I tried to just keep the business afloat, keep in people's minds, I suppose, is the overall answer. Challenging, but that was my goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people had the kind of the same predicament, right? And we say the easy solution or the easy plan would have been to go get a job or etc. But on one hand, yeah, it would have been easier. On the other hand, would it though? Because I think for me, anyway, I just talking personally. I had to give you some background, if you don't know, I went full-time a month before the pandemic really hit the UK. So I was like, well, yeah, okay. And the main thing there was actually, you've been saying for a year and a half that you are good at running this business, but are you? Right? This is the real, that was going to be the real test, but then it was the real test on top of the real test, right? Because suddenly we were put into this situation where video production was made illegal, basically. I couldn't do X, I couldn't do Y, and I was like, right, okay, so firstly I had a bit of an oh shit moment for 2 weeks, as I'm sure you had. And then I was like, okay, well, what can I do, right? So we went right back to the base level, we went right back to the beginning, and we said, okay, well, let me rebuild the company, right? Because this is a perfect opportunity. I don't actually need to make money right now, because I just prepped to go full time and basically be without income for 6 months. So I was like, well, okay, so let's use this time productively. Let's see what we can do. Let's really get my teeth into what it is that I want Brunton Media to be. And then it was like, okay, well, as you say, like, you know, how do you then get the word out that you're still there, you're still operating and how you are operating? And then that's, you know, one of the reasons why this podcast was born. You know, I started the podcast at the start of 2020, and then I kind of did a couple of episodes trying to, you know, put my toe in, tried it. Then the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, this is the only way I can make content right now. It's one of the only things I can do outside of then like instructional videos or etc., where it's more delivering me delivering to camera. But from a conversation point of view, I can't do anything. So, you know, then we started the podcast, and then, you know, we just started channeling that out in the marketing context. I mean, how did you sort of start marketing? Because I think for us anyway, there was a lot of companies that were in one or two boats. So they were like, yeah, we need to continue with marketing, we need to keep going, we need to do. Or the other ones where, ooh, we're gonna pull back. We're just gonna pull everything. We're just gonna stop.
I've seen both sides of that, especially in the photography industry. Because there was no clear, I've seen a lot of rules, or I suppose a bit more advice about the video. Whereas photography, it was there was no set rule of what you could or couldn't do. So people, especially for myself starting out, you didn't want to post something that potentially could get you in trouble. Everybody was watching because you're online, and you had no other option to be online. So I think you were treading very carefully on what could you do with your business.
Yeah, there was a huge grey area, right? Like there was, even for the video. Sorry to cut you off, but you know, even the video market, we didn't have any official guidance. I looked at Hollywood, right? I looked at the big studios in Los Angeles and America, and seeing what they were doing, what restrictions were they putting in, how were they going back to work. And the fact of the matter is, most people in video didn't for 3 months. We just didn't.
Everyone was in that same boat. Yeah. It was the same for me. So I was looking at different photography groups, what were other people doing in the rest of the country, if there was any kind of industry standard memberships that had kind of a bit of a know-how, or they were involved in some of the talks with the government. It was all those kind of things. I was just listening out for every piece of information to know where I stood. But in that time where I just thought, actually, I can't do anything, that is the situation that I'm in. So what I did was created a 5-day challenge for small business owners. It was free for them to learn how to capture their own images, how to use those images within their content, and basically just use what they've got at home, so that they had something to do and to learn a new skill. But it was showing me as the expert, so that when hopefully this lockdown had ended, they would come back to me and realise, you've been there from the beginning and understood where we are, etc. And it did massively help my business. So I actually did better after the pandemic, the lockdown. I did better with my business because people were more aware of me, because I've been talking to them pretty much every day. I'd been networking more because I had that opportunity. And as you say, I did the same thing where I used that time to kind of reflect on what have I done over the past year and a half, and where do I want to go next. So having that time that I probably wouldn't have had without the lockdowns happening allowed me to really think about what am I trying to achieve with this business. And it made a massive difference.
Do you think that you would have learned or marketed in the same way that you do now, or, gone about your business in the way you do now if the pandemic hadn't happened, right? Because I think there's going to be a sector of people, as potentially we're looking like it's coming to an end for whatever reason, right? Not COVID disappearing, etc. I don't want to get into the politics of that, but we are moving back to what is quote unquote a normal traditional life, right? Like we're able to mix, we're able to do digital, so on and so on. But I think that the people who are going to start out in business after the pandemic now, whenever that ends, right, whether that's in a year or 2 years or etc., because they won't have been able to, or they won't have been operating during this time, do you think they're at a disadvantage to an extent?
Again, from my personal experience, I think having that time allowed me to actually sit down and reflect on where I'd been, where I want to be, who do I want to work with, what am I charging. And I think without having that time, I don't think I would have been in the same position I'm in now, I think I would have still been making the same mistakes for maybe not right up until this point, but certainly for a lot longer before I'd, realised that I need to put my prices up, for example, and all the other things that you get as a startup business. I think that would have took me a little bit longer to realise because I was just saying yes to everything at the beginning. Whereas having that time, speaking to the businesses that I was working with, really just it showed me who my passionate ideal client was. So yeah, I think if I started my business now, moving forward without having that time, I think it would just took me a lot longer to get there.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point, and I'm really glad you mentioned about price increases or price jumping or changing your prices, because I think it's one of the many, but one of the scariest things that people think about in business, right? Like, okay, cool, things are going okay, we've got some clients, we've got some money coming in, we're making good money, or we're making okay money, great, cool, fantastic. But at what stage or what advice in your experience, because I know you've just gone through a price change and you've just gone through those, so I think it's interesting to explore. What kind of advice would you give to people who are in a position, or when does someone actually know, okay, I need to up my prices, or okay, I need to change something?
For me, it was making the scariest decision that I've made in my business, which is investing in something else, investing in somebody else rather. So I thought I needed a coach, but I didn't want to just hand my money out to anybody that said that they could help me, because as you know, most people will say, yeah, I can help you, can definitely do all those things. So it took a little bit of time to find the right person, and it wasn't until I really got involved in that and had that time to see what they were doing with their business and their working model. It was working. It wasn't just somebody saying this can work for you, but they had no evidence of that. They were living what they were preaching, if that makes sense. So for me, that was the kind of, look, she's doing it, and she's done it by doing A, B, and C, and that's what I need to implement into if I keep charging what I'm charging, I'm never going to get there. And I think it was seeing, because it was a group kind of coaching program, seeing other people doing the work and achieving those goals, it was that motivation to, right, I really need to stick my head down now and get this work done, so that people are going to see the value in what I'm offering. I've got something valuable to offer, and I need to charge more to reflect that.
Yeah, and I think, it's a really important position to get to firstly understand what your worth is, but then also secondly, to understand how you articulate that to your market or your clients, or, etc. in that respect, because overall, I think that there's two steps that people will get to where they need to start up in their prices. Option one is they simply have too much demand for what they're doing, right? So there's physically too much work for them to do, right? Like if I'm asked to do 10 videos in a day, that's impossible, right? Unless I can allocate the resources. But then you need to ask yourself, okay, well, why are you getting so much demand, right? Is it just because you're the cheapest, right? Sometimes that might be true, right? Other times it might be because you are the best of the best of the best of the best of the best. Okay, great. If that's the reality, fantastic. But especially at the start, the clients, and this is no disrespect to the clients, because they are not necessarily understand the value completely, or they don't necessarily, maybe they logistically they can only afford a certain quality or a certain percentage of videographer, photographer, marketer, blah 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 blah. But you're at a stage where you need to understand that's where you fit at that time. And as you grow a business, and as you get better, and as you become better, and as you become a larger team or a larger set of people, as you mentioned, you have to be in a position where you need to make sure you're still making money. There's a massive difference, in my opinion anyway, from I'm going to take a hit short term personally to grow the company. Great, fantastic, you should do that. And you should continue to do that, in my opinion, to continue to grow the company, right? If you're, I think there's sometimes a misconception as a business owner where we're like, oh, we're raking it in because we're the business owner. Actually, in reality, for the first 5 to 10 years, you're probably going to make the same or probably less than you did when you had a job, right? If you're lucky, and you have to work 3 times harder to get it, right? In the respect to hours or commitment or experience or etc. And it's about how you reinvest. I mean, do you have like, because I know as a photographer or a videographer, there's very traditional ways to reinvest, which is I'm going to buy a new lens, I'm going to buy new gear. Potentially, you're going to buy into coaching, etc. I mean, for what, because I know there's a lot of people who do listen to the podcast or do watch the podcast who are starting out in business or etc. I mean, where would you say people should start actually investing, right? So let's say they've made their first £1,000 in profit. Great. Fantastic achievement. Well done. You made your first £1,000. Okay. How would you recommend, for example, in a theoretical scenario, that they should spend that money?
I think for me, it was, right, what do I need to do to enhance the experience, I suppose. So it might be even little things that you would invest in, something to make the overall experience for the clients moving forward so that they're going to come back and they're going to recommend you. So then once you continue to get those thousands in, then you would start investing maybe a little bit more and looking at the equipment that you've got, or it might be things like coaching, anything that's going to help you to move forward to that next level. So you should never be stagnant. I think that's the way that I looked at it, is if you get to a place and you think, oh, this is really comfortable, you should be looking at the next step. Whereas I think sometimes people get to that stagnant level and think, right, this is great, why should I change it? If it's not broken, why should I change it? But actually, it's about what can you do next to improve the experience for the client or improve the business so that you're at where you should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this podcast is a key example of that, right? Like, I could have just continued having the podcast the way I normally do it. Yeah, it would have been that. Yeah, it would have been all right. Yeah, it would have been, it would have got the same results, right? Like, but if I want to up the results it's getting and I want to be able to do more with it and I want to be able to do this and this and this, I need to change the formula, right? Now, this setup requires me a lot more effort, a lot more time, and a lot more energy to make it look good. But my hope is, again, we don't know this, this is the trial episode to be trying it. I hope that it will be a better watching experience and a better consuming experience than it was previously. Not to say that those episodes don't have value, because at the end of the day, the content which you talk about or go over or write about, etc., is what's valuable, right? That is what's valuable there. But at the end of the day, if you can package it up in a different way that's more appealing to your end consumer or your end client, then they're more likely to consume it, right? And I know we met through Only, and I think it's valuable because especially as people, we're in January, we're going into the new year still, we're still at quite early stage within the year. What would you say is, the key pillars of a business to start out, right? Like, if you could tell yourself week 1, week 2, week 3, right, with the experience you have now, with the knowledge you have now, what would you say you need to spend time doing X, Y, Z, whatever that may be, or just X if there's only one, right? Like, what would you say to the earlier person that started, earlier Lauren that started her business, knowing what she wants to do but not necessarily how to do it?
I think I would still have gone through that same few months of saying yes to everything that was coming through. So I was doing a little bit of, I had a couple of wedding clients, I had a couple of business clients, and then I would have a few just everyday families being captured. It might have been a bit of events, but I think what I should have done earlier on is looked and reflected on each of those clients of which ones do I enjoy working with, which ones are making me feel rubbish at the end of it. So not always looking at the positives, but sometimes the negatives, so that I know it sounds horrible, but get rid of them earlier on, because
in the nicest way, of course.
Yeah, in the nicest way. I don't mean like kill them off, but I mean not have them as they weren't my ideal client.
Yeah, exactly.
But it took me a lot longer to get them.
Yeah, they're not the work you want to specialize in, or they're not the work that you necessarily want to become known for or have that level of niche. And what we're talking about here is finding that level of niche, right?
I think my goal is not to be a super niched photographer. Like, I love what I'm doing now, and I like the variety of people that I work with. It keeps it different, it keeps it interesting, without thinking I'm only going to work with this type of industry ever. But I do think, looking back, I wish that I'd have just reflected more on who I was working with, who was bringing me joy, not them personally, but the type of work. And the same goes for which ones weren't. So I know now, looking back, the weddings, I was saying yes, because when you start off in photography, everyone talks about, yes, weddings, that's the ones that are going to bring you in the most money. Like, everybody's doing it, it's great. But actually, my body hurt. I was bruised the next day. I'm not the type of girl that absolutely plans their wedding for their whole life and gets really excited about it. It's just not me. So I didn't relate to my clients as much as I would want to, and as much as I do with the businesses, because I understood and related to their stories more than I do with a happy couple, you know. So I think it was definitely about reflecting more about who you want to work with. That would be my first one. The second one is networking, but as much as I love networking, and I still continue to do that, I think I was putting myself out there in too many places. And so at the beginning, because I didn't know, much about networking, I was attending maybe more networking events at the beginning than I was working. So I was seeing everyone, meeting all these different people, but I tend to, especially in the Northeast, it tends to be like the same people will go to all of them. So, you're getting to know people and build up those relationships, which some of them I'm still friends with, some of them have bought from me, and vice versa. And they have been beneficial. But I do think I should have cut that down and found a networking group like Only, as we're part of now, that you invest your time into that and build relationships up in that one or two places.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's one of these things where it's this quantity balance with quality, right? It's always better to do the quality side of things before you do quantity, right? There is a certain factor, especially when you talk marketing, when you talk networking, when you talk about content, you talk about anything, where you have to have a certain level of consistency for it to work. But if you're putting out rubbish, or if you're putting out garbage, it's going to do worse for you than you not posting at all. So it's in the content case, but the same as if you're in a networking group which just doesn't synergize with you. I've talked before about my networking journey. As I think I'm part of two. The reason why I'm part of two is those two groups both synergize really well with how I work. But the thing is that I made a really established point was, okay, well, I want to do more networking. I know that there's a lot of reason for me to do a lot of networking, to grow the business, build new connections, etc. But what's the hurdle there? What was the opportunity cost that I'm giving up by giving my time to networking? Potentially I fall behind on editing. Potentially I can't create as much content. Okay, potentially we can't take on as many productions because of how busy I would have to trade it up between networking. Okay, so by establishing that, you can then put structures or people or ideas in place to then resolve those issues, so you can win in both cases. It does become harder because you're spinning more plates, and there's financial challenges that go there, but also logistical challenges that go there, etc. But the core is about understanding what you're trading up, because networking is incredibly valuable, but it's like content, it's like anything. You have to put in a lot more than you get out, and it's about, I think, for the viewer, what, because a lot of people who listen to the podcast, a lot of people who do consume my content, are completely brand new to business. They have a pipe dream, they have an idea, they have like a spark, they're like, I want to be a photographer, I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to be this, but they're not 100% sure on should they do networking, or how do they get the confidence to go and do networking. I mean, what was your first experience like with networking? I mean, were you really nervous? Were you or were you the opposite? Were you really confident? Did how was that for you?
I went, as I said, so I went to a few of them, and the first couple that I went to, I remember there was about 40 to 60 people in the room. A lot of them dressed very formally, and when I started my business, I was, how old am I now? 28. So I was 25, 26-ish. And I walked into the room and I just felt I was definitely the youngest in there. And there was, so many people, and it's where do you fit into that conversation? There'd be like 3 people and they obviously knew each other, so they would be involved in that conversation. So you kind of like hover around till you get involved. And I always found that bit a little bit awkward, but as I've done it more, obviously it gets easier. But I definitely think it's about the whole business experience is about putting yourself into uncomfortable positions, because if you're comfortable, then something's not right. So I think it's about challenging yourself. And as I say, so like those ones, I would meet people. And then the second time I went, I knew a couple of faces, but I really made it my mission to not stick to those people. Like, they were great and lovely and I spoke to them, but I would say hi and then make sure that I would go and speak to at least 1 or 2 other people in the room, if not more, that I had never had a conversation with. Because I think you can get into that habit of walking into the room and sticking to the people that you know. And I found that actually the original time that I'd gone and I seen those 3 people together that knew each other, they'll stick together every single time. And it's not good to get into that habit, because then you're not networking, you're just going for a coffee with a friend.
Yeah, and it's, I think about, I think as from a psychological point of view, but also as humans, we naturally want to go and do something that's comfortable, right? Like, we go into a room, we see someone, we like, okay, cool, we're now going to go talk to this person because we know it's not going to be socially awkward or difficult or challenging to have that conversation. I think the more you put yourself in uncomfortable situations, though, the more comfortable you feel in putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, right? So it's the same with money, it's the same with investing, it's the same with putting yourself out there, it's the same with marketing, it's the same with anything that you need to do to grow a business, in my opinion. But you have to start that ball rolling, right? Like, for me, money is a resource, and I'm sure we can get into this a little bit, but money's a resource. Yeah, you need enough to live on, but outside that, it should be used to do something, right? Is it buying you more attention? Is it buying you more time? Is it increasing, as we discussed previously, is it discussing the quality of your work? Potentially, right? And that doesn't mean, to be a good photographer, you need to spend thousands of pounds on cameras or thousands of pounds on lenses, right? Like, there's lots of things that you can do for not a lot of money to mean that you are a better photographer, because at the end of the day, that's not, for me anyway, I don't think gear is the be all and end all of whether you're a good photographer or not, right? Do they make it easier? Do things become easier when you're on a camera that's more expensive? Potentially, right? Will you get more keeper shots in fast shooting scenarios? Potentially, yes, right? But I think, did you have was there a big psychological barrier for you when it came to spending, investing money consistently? Because from what I found is now I kind of don't want to do it all the time, and I'm now it gives me the drive to earn more. Because I'm actually, well, when I earn this, I can then do this thing that was going to move the company forward and so on.
Yeah, definitely. For me at the consistently throughout starting my business and to where I'm at now, investing is a scary thing if you've never done it before. And especially if you came from earning a regular wage, you pay all your bills and then whatever you've got left over is for you. Whereas with the business, you think about what's left over for you, but also what can you put back into the business. And I think the easy thing as a photographer, if you're influenced by other photographers who are constantly talking about, we've got the next best camera or the next best lens, and you think, I need that. It's the only way I'm going to be a professional photographer is if I spend all those thousands, but I can't afford that right now. I'm not making that much money. And I don't mind admitting that when I first started my business, I had a hobbyist camera. It wasn't great. It was, I don't really know it. It's a Canon, what was it? 700D, I think. So, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. And for most of my clients, they had no idea because they've seen the photos, they loved the photos, and it didn't make a difference. Whereas you get a couple of hobbyists and think they understood the camera equipment and thought, she's a professional and she's coming along with that. But it didn't affect how I was doing things. And then as I started making more money, I upgraded my equipment, and I didn't go for the next best thing. I went for something that could help me do my job to the best of my ability. and just make things a little bit easier, as you were saying. But it is a scary thing to invest into your business, to think it doesn't necessarily have to be about equipment. It could be software that could make your job easier, having a CRM that is going to help you to just make that workflow much smoother so that the client feels like they've had your attention from start to end and there's no gaps in that. So there's loads of different ways that you can do it, but I think it's about not just panic buying and going straight for what you think you need. It's just doing it bit by bit, assessing how is this going to actually make a difference to you and to your client's experience.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point as well. But how I look at it mainly nowadays anyway is, okay, well, there's some sides of investing where it's like I'm going to buy new equipment, as we just discussed, but also what can I outsource to someone else to do while I'm doing this, or while I'm on a shoot, or yesterday was a key example. We had a shoot with a brand new client. I had a shoot the previous day that we created some behind the scenes content around, which was fantastic. And because I had outsourced the editing on it, the behind the scenes video is already half cut by the time I finished the following shoot. Well, if it was just me having to edit that video, what would have happened is I would have come in today, and at probably some point around 8 o'clock tonight, I might have had a chance to look at it. Not edit it, look at it, right? But hopefully by 8 o'clock tonight, the edit will nearly be finished in its entirety, right? So imagine how much more you can do once you take this principle and you duplicate it, right? Now, of course, there's an issue because you're either trading time for money or money for time all the time, right? Whether you cost by the hour, your cost by project, etc. But it's about making sure, and one of the concepts which I learned probably start of the pandemic actually, was as long as you're making more per hour than what you're paying, doesn't matter, right? Now, that might not mean that you I might not make this amount of profit. Okay, that's fine. But think about what you're gaining long term, right? And everything you do is long term. When you're talking networking, when you're talking marketing, when you're talking content creation, when you're talking even just us having this conversation now. We might never work together, or we might. I mean, it's quite logistically challenging for us to work together because you're in the north, I'm in the south. But there's other ways we can still support each other's businesses without ever having to physically meet. Now, right? And I think, as just a kind of some final thoughts, I think that's something which not a lot of businesses necessarily accept pre-pandemic. It was very, we have to meet, we have to do it this way, we have to go to we have to go to London, we have to go to Manchester, we have to go to Liverpool, blah, 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 to get those meetings, to have those conversations with those high-powered individuals in those companies. I mean, have you found in your experience as well that there's a kind of a middle ground now where people are like, yeah, we can Zoom, yeah, we can grab coffee, yeah, we can do, there's a lot more, it's a lot more fun, a free flow about how you logistically do it, and it's less kind of, you have to come to my office, you have to do this, you have to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, like, even my own mindset was that I work in the Northeast, I'll work with Northeast business owners, I'll speak to other Northeast based photographers, videographers, but actually because of the pandemic, it's opened up those boundaries, I suppose. I joined Only, which has allowed me to meet yourself and so many other businesses all over the country. So, as you say, I might never work with those people because we're at opposite ends, but actually I'm having more conversations, more collaborations. I'm meeting people and learning so much more because I've expanded my network to be countrywide rather than just being in one place. And even for the network itself, they've just opened up to New York. How many people are actually going to go physically to New York is probably unlikely, but it means that you can still do business across, the water. And same for, I don't know if you've heard much about the virtual photography, but that's another thing that's just massively opened up as a result of the pandemic, where I can now photograph anybody in the world and I don't have to leave my living room. Technology has come on so much, but I think, as you say, it's not just the technology that's moved. I think that was maybe already there. It was more people's mindsets. How long have we had Skype for? But nobody really used it. And then all of a sudden everyone loved